What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Friday edition of Back Your Play with Q. Rich Quinones here, our NFL guy, our insider, making the preseason trek. That, of course, is Lloyd Vance. And we still have the NFC East to get to, which we will. But a lot of news and notes coming down, preseason in full effect. We saw the Eagles and the Browns play to a tie last night. I know you were covering the game, a ton of injuries for the Eagles and that one. We got some NFL news and notes to always kind of pinpoint, highlight, and illustrate. And of course, Friday's edition of BYP from our good friends over at Play It Again Sports, 1450 Clementsford Road in Deptford, New Jersey. All right, my friend, how are you?
Doing good, a little tired, Always making that trek to the game is interesting, the traffic and everything. But it's an exciting experience being down there, and it's always fun. I got to share it with my father. He's a season ticket holder, so
Good.
that's what he loves to do. He loves going to his Eagles games and putting on his green. Uh, you know, right now I'm neutral, so they always laugh at me at all the family functions that
Yeah.
I'm not an Eagles fan. I'm a hater, but I tell it like it is, man. But it was fun to see some live action and finally get to see some of the faces that we've been kind of following this preseason.
Yeah. My biggest takeaway, well, the injuries, obviously, and you feel bad for the kid. McPherson goes down, suffers that torn right Achilles. The issue now is, right, he was basically listed as a primary backup nickel corner to Avante Maddox, who's always dealing with some injuries. They lost a couple other players with some neck injuries. Thank God, nothing to worry about too much. Other players get nicked up. We see that, right? And then for me, now you tell me, for me, look, I think the Philadelphia Eagles, aside from last night, the linebackers last night. I mean, I thought Dean played well, made the play of the game last night when he caused that fumble to cause John Kelly to fumble to goal line. Um, but I'm looking at this kid Nolan Smith as well. They got Carter already looking like he's going to fill in nicely. We talk about the winning teams in the NFL, Lloyd, and the Eagles have made no bones about it. They always want to add depth in key positions, right? The linebacker spot for years was somewhat weak. Seems as though they're solidifying that. The defensive end, the defensive line, the defensive tackle spot. To me, that's really going to be the key for this team. We saw how they led the league in sacks last year. We saw how they got to quarterbacks. They were knocking quarterbacks out left and right. To me, the Eagles are going to live and die by what goes on in the trenches on the defensive side of football. I think that's going to set the tone for their whole season. And man, you just get these fresh legs in consistently and constantly. And that defense is going to be a real tough out to not only try to move the ball on, but to try to score and put up some points.
Actually, it's going to be interesting because this unit, we know they're in flux. Jonathan Gannon surprisingly gets the job with
Yep.
Arizona.
Yep.
He's gone, and they bring in Sean Desai. He's a guy he's a Fangio guy. So he's a Vic Fangio guy learning to bring that pressure type defense coming to Philadelphia. And you're right, they just want to continue building on what they had last year, 70 sacks leading the NFL and just causing a lot of havoc out there. So a lot of new bodies out there. I particularly spot shadowed the linebacker core, as you talked about, Nakobe Dean. Is he going to be that Jeremiah Trotter type guy in the middle who's able to get everybody in the right positions and then make those game changing, flashing plays? So I talked to some folks last year, and he was a little slow to pick things up, but he seems to be kind of getting it. Not a guy that's a real big practice type player. So he shines more in games, and you saw that yesterday with that big hit and the fumble. And another guy that jumped out linebacker to me is Zach Cunningham. I followed him coming over from the Texans and the Titans. A really good tackler for the Eagles. He wore number 52. So a lot of people are like, who is this guy? And he was flying all over the place. He had 7 tackles. And I think he's kind of beat out Nick Morrow for that spot next to the Kobe Dean. So you're probably going to see Zach Cunningham there. They also signed Miles Jack. We
Yep.
know him from
Yep.
UCLA
Yep.
and the Jaguars. He was playing with the last kind of unit out there.
Yeah.
So, he may be one of those guys that is on the bubble, may not make the team. So you always got to remember when you watch these preseason games, one cut this year, they're going to go from 90 guys down to 53 at the
Mm.
end of this training camp period. So, it's not going to be that gradual dissension. It's just going to be all right. these are our guys, and we're going to go for it. And you kind of saw that, like we always talk about Q. Guys like Jalen Hurts and the regular guys, they just weren't out there, and
Right,
they
of
just don't want
course.
to see those guys hurt.
Yeah, you mentioned more, right? So you got your weak side linebacker, Dean, middle linebacker. And again, you look at Smith getting the reps, obviously, because Reddick is in your Johnny Mack kind of tweeted out that on good authority, Reddick will be ready by game one when the season starts. But then think about this, right? Graham, Carter, Cox, Sweat, and then, rotate Robinson, Davis, Williams, Barnett. I mean, man, it's like feast or famine, right? I mean, and that takes a ton of pressure off the corners in the secondary if you're getting to the quarterback, making him make mistakes. This is a little more obscure, and this is a knock on wood kind of take, but Marcus Mariota concerns me a little bit. And the only reason I say this is because we've seen Jalen Hurts get nicked up and banged up. They don't have a primary backup now. I mean, Mariota is actually regressing. I mean, missing open throws, tentative, when to scramble, when to take off. It's kind of rare that we talk, about the backup quarterback in some circumstances, correct? But if you really break it down a little bit more, I mean, listen, we've seen it kind of pigeonhole some teams if they weren't properly ready, if they didn't have that guy waiting in the wings just to get some reps if the starter goes down, i.e. in Jalen Hurts. I mean, listen, are they going to, you think they might wait to bring in another backup, another body if someone gets cut out there, or Mariota is going to be the guy they're going to stick with as a backup just in case?
You're kind of reading my mind in terms of my notes, and when I saw Mariota play, I was just like, wow, man, they paid him to be a very high price
Yeah.
backup. And, he has that pedigree, the Heisman Trophy winner from Oregon and #2 overall pick. But he just didn't look good in terms of
No.
very tentative in the pocket, took too many sacks, was not getting the ball out of his hand. And when he did throw a cue, very inaccurate. He was 9 of 17 for only 85 yards. So his yards per completion around 9 yards, and the interception, and he took the 3 sacks that we talked about. So, it's concerning if you're an Eagles fan, because when you look at Mariota, um, you're right. Hurts has gotten banged up. The first call it 2 years ago was the ankle.
Yep.
Last year was a
Yep.
shoulder injury,
Yep.
and you're going to need somebody to step in. Not that Gardner Minshew was the be all end all in terms of the backup quarterback. Um, everybody would like to have that veteran presence guy to come in there. I go back to the old Dolphins days. Don Strock would come off the bench, for
Sure.
the Don Shula teams, and he would step right in there and then would miss a heartbeat. But if the Eagles lose Hurts, it's going to be a big problem, because Mariota's their guy. They paid him. Um, the youngster, I think it's McKee. He looked pretty good. He's a young draft pick, but obviously he's playing against the threes and the fours out there.
Right.
But they seem like Mariota's their guy, but he just did not look he didn't look the part. Did not
Yeah.
look the part.
We'll break down the Eagles and the respective teams in the NFC
Yeah.
East when we do our preview next week, and then we'll get into, we blink, season's going to be right here. We'll get into divisional winners and kind of what we do typically every year. You mentioned like Gardner Minshew. I mean, think about this, right? So, I mean, listen, you talk about backups in the league, right? And then boom, what happens? Who do the Colts name as their starter, right? Anthony Richardson. I want to get your thoughts on a couple things when we mention these young quarterbacks. And as you know, years ago, it was kind of wait and see approach, right? I mean, Aaron Rodgers, Favre to some extent, Aaron Rodgers waited behind Favre. There were a couple other examples, even with Eli, they were 5-3 at the time, 5-4, I think, when Coughlin decided to bench Warner because he was fumbling and had hand issues. But you look at some of these young quarterbacks, Stroud and Richardson and the like, and they're going to get thrown to the wolves. I mean, is this the new norm now, what we've seen over the last several years? Because young quarterbacks have been able to step in and make that quick ascension and learn on the fly? Or are you a little surprised that some of these guys are getting the keys to the kingdom early on?
And it has to factor into the coach and the general manager. So a lot of these guys are hitching their wagon to these quarterbacks. And back in the day, you had established general managers, guys that could kind of sit back and wait, and wait for these a veteran to teach this young guy how to play the
Yep.
position. But now they're expecting these young quarterbacks, whether it's going to be Bryce Young or Richardson or Stroud, all three of them are
Stroud,
going to
yep.
start for their respective teams. They want them to hit the ground running.
Yeah.
And obviously the blueprint print is from 2008. You had Joe Flacco and Matt Ryan step in straight from college campus, and they led their teams to the playoffs. And you know, are you going to be able to see that? They were kind of some rare occasions because you're going to have these young quarterbacks have growing pains, like you're saying. They're going to be thrown to the wolves. The coverage is just so different in National Football League. I watch a lot of these young quarterbacks, and they're immediately looking at their read right away as soon as they're getting the snap. They could get away with this stuff in college, and then they would kind of throw a jump ball to a more athletic receiver, and he's beating a defensive back that's not as good. So, everybody's a top athlete in the NFL, and I do think these guys are having the growing pains. And you hope they don't get hit too much because a lot of them are going to teams with kind of subpar offensive lines.
So I, I know it's Monday morning quarterbacking right on a Friday, and it's kind of piggybacking the point. And I'm not trying to have this as a lazy take or observation, but I never liked Trey Lance coming out of college. I just didn't see any redeeming qualities from the kid. Now you can sit there. Look, I don't know him, never spoke to him. Could be a real nice kid. I'm just saying, talent wise, I never really saw it. You're talking about a former number 3 overall pick. He's basically gone from kind of being a franchise starting quarterback right now to a third stringer who might not even make the roster. You look at his performance in the preseason opener, it was uneven to say the most. I mean, Brandon Jacobs said this last year on 27 and Q. He thought the 49ers were going to trade him, and I kind of chuckled and laughed at it. I'm thinking to myself, well, what do you do with this kid? Is it fair to evaluate him on a handful of games and he gets hurt, or is it just he's not the right quarterback for the type of offense they're running there in San Francisco with Shanahan? I believe it's the latter. I believe he's just not the right fit, and you're just trying to, put the square peg in a round hole, and it's just a bad fit for Trey Lance, and he might be the odd man out. But we talk about these young quarterbacks having some wiggle room and some patience, but now you look in San Francisco, and it's probably because he goes down and Purdy basically takes the reins and never looks back.
And it's a situation where John Lynch, or general manager, or whoever made that decision to draft him, they don't want to wipe the egg off their face and say we made a mistake. And we've seen this over and over again, where teams just kind of trot out somebody that is just not ready. And when I knew we were going to talk about Trey Lance, so I kind of brought up it, number 3 overall pick in 2021,
Yep.
and they traded a boatload to I think it was the Miami Dolphins, and like 3 number ones and a third round pick. The guy only had 19 college starts. In the NFL, he's 2-2 as a starter. And my thing though is guys I talk to that are at their practices, he's just not crisp. He's not picking things up, and he just does not look the part. He's not getting it done. Actually, Sam Darnold may be looking better than him and Brock Purdy. I mean, that's a conversation for later. But Trey Lance, I just think you're right. He's probably going to end up, they're going to trade him, get rid of him just to get him off their roster. And, and,
Wow.
and he goes to another team for like a 5th, 6th round draft pick or something like that.
So you think about it, Miami fleeced him.
They did.
I
They
mean,
did.
I just pulled it up. Their first in exchange for the first round picks in 2021, 2022, and 2023, and their third round pick in
Yes.
2022. I mean, wow. And he was in, if memory serves me correct, right? FCS, correct?
Yeah. So he came from a small school, and then
Like
it
a
was the
Carson
COVID
Wentz,
year.
who the knock
Yeah.
on Carson Wentz was he didn't have a handful of games under his belt or the level of competition. Man, yeah, but what do? You keep him on the roster just so you don't have egg on your face? I mean, Shanahan seems to be in love with Sam Darnold, and obviously they've got a quarterback who maybe if he doesn't get knocked out of the NFC Championship, takes them to the Super Bowl in Purdy. So it's like a numbers game right now.
And then, typically that third quarterback is going to be a developmental type. It's going to be a guy who he may be an undrafted free agent, he may be coming from a minor league like the USFL or something like that, and you want to develop and give him an opportunity, or put him on a practice squad. But Trey Lance, after all that draft capital that we just
Yep.
talked about, you're not going to put that guy on the practice squad or have him to be a developmental clipboard holder. So they'll probably eventually just kind of quietly step away from him. A lot of it kind of reminds me of, think about what happened with the Eagles and Rieger. Jalen Rieger, they draft him instead of Justin Jefferson. Huge mistake. They keep trying to trot him out there over and over again. Everybody sees he's just not good enough. And then they quietly kind of, I think the Eagles trade him for like a 7th-round pick, surprisingly, to Minnesota, who took him. So, you see this so often with these high draft picks, guys that kind of just aren't working out, and they kind of maybe have a couple stops after that. But it's unfortunate for Trey Lance, but he's a guy, he's a 55% career passer, and he threw for 48% last year. So that just shows you he's just not completing past the NFL level, and he's just not a ready quarterback.
Yeah, and to your point, and I think it's more apples and oranges, right? We're talking a quarterback, wide receiver. If it happens, it happens, right? If it turns out it doesn't work out, so be it. But you're talking about, I'm drafting a quarterback here, right? I'm drafting a quarterback early on, top 1, 2, 3, top 5 pick. I'm going to lose my job if this doesn't work out. As much as I couldn't stand Gettleman, Gettleman drafted who? Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. And we all screamed and hollered. It looks like those were 2 great picks right now on the surface, you would think. But yeah, it's just, man, it's unfortunate because you cannot force this kid in a type of offense. You got Purdy, you got Lance, you got Darnold. Darnold's going to be that backup. And if Purdy gets hurt, Sam Darnold's going to jump in there and he'll be the starter. They love him. They love what he's doing. I mean, they love that, and he's still a relatively young guy, Sam Darnold. I mean, think about it. He's only 26 years old. But yeah, the quarterback position, speaking of which, Washington named Sam Howell their starter. Lake Lewis has been covering the team for well over 15 years. He said this last year, this kid's going to be the starter come 2023. They named him the starter. Look, I don't know how much we're going to see second year out of this kid. I think what's worth watching is how Bieniemy tries to basically push Rivera out of the back door. I mean, how about these reports? We'll get to Hal in a moment, but how about these reports coming out of Washington? You had McCoy, LaShawn McCoy, when Bieniemy was with the Kansas City Chiefs, and McCoy was there, basically saying, look, that type of coach getting in your face, yelling and screaming, it doesn't fly with the NFL's today's NFL player. And there's a reason this guy never got a head coaching gig. I mean, now you're starting to hear some prominent players of Washington starters go to Rivera, that this guy's too hard on us. I mean, is this something of Bieniemy trying too hard, soft players, sensitive players, or, this is the guy's MO? He rubs players and maybe coaches the wrong way.
I think it's his MO. He's a tough guy. He trained underneath Bill McCartney, who was a tough coach at Colorado, and got a lot of that team to a national championship level. And it's just who he is, and you're right. It's interesting because he's coming there. He's almost like acting like I said earlier, he's a de facto head coach and he's acting like it. Rivera needs to, rein him in. But I think, Hugh, that he's been given the green light by the new ownership group to kind of mold this team and kind of, give him a kick in the butt. And they have a lot of talent on that roster in terms of the positions around a quarterback. But I just think this is a big soap opera waiting to happen, and
Bingo.
it's something that's going to play out all season. And it's not good when players don't like you in the locker room, and they're talking behind the coach's back. We saw that here in Philadelphia, where I remember the Chip Kelly days, where they could not get along with him, and it just kept building, and then it just all blew up.
Well, it started when they lost to Tampa, Detroit, and Miami. They got waxed. I remember those games, and he sat up there. He looked like a beaten man. And you knew that Chip's time was coming to an end. That's the thing. So everyone's getting on Rivera, because of what he said. I mean, what, is this more Rivera saying, I got to look over my shoulder? Is this Rivera undermining Bieniemy? I understand you have to pick and choose your words wisely, right? We always say measure your words, so to speak. But I think Rivera knows that Bieniemy was picked to be his eventual successor, right? I don't think maybe it's the worst kept secret in the NFL or Rodgers going to the Jets, whatever. But if players are concerned about his intensity, and then you have a head coach who makes certain comments, who's going to have to answer for that before the season even starts, you've got all these outside noise and distractions. You just named a starter. You want to focus on that. I almost get the sense that it is a train wreck waiting to happen, meaning there might be a sideline blow up, some internal, guys are on his side, guys are on Rivera's side. There's the clash, the divided locker room. And you would think they got rid of all the toxicity and the culture with Snyder finally selling the team and everything. But yet it strikes me as the same old, Washington franchise, Washington Commanders, Redskins, whatever the hell you want to call them at this point. I almost get the sense, even from a betting standpoint, I would hammer the under with this team because I think there's going to be so much dissension within this group. Forget the talent for a moment, that you almost, I feel as though Bieniemy in the back of his mind is like, man, if we start 1-6, this guy's out. And they're going to be stuck with me. And they're finally going to jettison me into the head coaching. But I don't know, man. It's just, it's almost
It's very lot of puppet strings going
there.
on
You
there.
go. Yeah.
And you wonder, you harken back to, I remember Rich Kotite was placed on Buddy Ryan's staff to
Yeah.
be his offensive coordinator. They said Buddy didn't know what he was doing to offense, put Rich on the team,
Yep.
and then they'll work together. Well, these two guys behind the scenes didn't like each other, and they're fighting when he back and forth, and then it comes to the sidelines, and then you have these factions on the team. The offense doesn't like the defense, and this push shove, and the next thing you know, they lose a playoff game, and they said, you know what, Buddy Ryan's got to go, and they promote Rich Kotite to the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. So, we've seen a lot of situations like this, and it's unfortunate because over the years, Rivera's been known as that good guy around the NFL. He's a stoic person. He was with those Chicago Bears teams that we talked about, the '85 team, and he learned under Buddy Ryan and Mike Ditka. So he knows the right way of running a team, and he did a great job of Carolina Panthers and cleaning up with that mess in Washington. But it just does not look good, and I think Bieniemy's just going to keep pushing. That's the way he is.
Great.
I've been watching a lot of this film in terms of the Patrick Mahomes TV show, and you see him. He's volatile sometimes with his players. He can get in a shouting match on the sidelines, but they always had Andy Reid to kind of say there, all right, Bieniemy, calm down, cool it. But I just don't know if Rivera is going to do that because that's not his guy.
How does that fly? Like, look, we can agree Mike Singletary was one of the greatest linebackers, right, of our generation. Hall of Fame, just a game changer, that intensity, that fire. But, after a while, the message, it was cute and inspiring, and I've run through a brick wall the first, second, third time. Fourth, fifth time, I'm like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Like, winners, and I can't have it. Don't want, and that flamed him out. He burned out. I guess the reason I bring it up is because they've got bigger issues to deal with, right? Because you're throwing Hal out there. You're hoping you get your key defensive players fully healthy for once. You've got some offensive skill players. I think Washington could be a good team. But if Hal struggles, you're going to go to Jacoby Brissett. You're going to go to Jake State from. I mean, it's just, to me, he's like the third quarterback on the depth chart. I mean, you're putting a lot invested into Hal to kind of take you from where you were and where you're hoping to go. And this is the last thing they need, is to have to worry about, Bieniemy and Rivera and the players barking at each other. I agree with you. I think I put up their schedule, and I mean, look, they open at home against Arizona. They go on the road at Denver, but then you've got Buffalo and Philly. Let's just say they're 2-2. No one's talking. They lose to Arizona, lose to Denver. They're losing to Buffalo, and they're losing to Philly. Point being, they're 0-4. They might not get that first win until Chicago. And by that time, maybe they sit and say, thanks, Ron, we're going to go in a different direction. So, yeah, to your point, I mean, what's your expectations with this kid House second year going in under this offense?
He's solid kid. I scout a little bit coming out of North Carolina. I mean, he can move around a little bit in the pocket, can get make some nice throws. A very consistent quarterback, but it's a big jump where he's coming from the ACC to the NFL, and I just don't know if he's ready to take the reins. And we'll see how he does. He'll probably struggle. That Arizona game may be a good chance to give us a barometer on it because
Yep.
Arizona, let's face it, they're a very bad team. So
Yeah.
Washington should win that football game. And then at Denver, that's going to be a tough defense. They're going to probably disguise some things, try to have him make some mistakes. Sean Payton, he'll have his team ready to play. That'll be another good test. Buffalo at home, and then at Philadelphia. So, yeah, you're right. They could be 0-4, but maybe if they can come out of that 2-2, and he's made some nice game-winning drives and a couple throws here and there, to Gibson and McLaurin, all the weapons that he
Yep.
has. Um, he's a good young kid, but he's not that first-round talent, and we've seen quite often that quarterbacks that are not drafted in probably the first round or maybe in the early second just have not panned out in the NFL. So,
Yeah.
you'd like to give him his opportunity, but all this drama surrounding him definitely is going to affect him.
Yeah, and remember too, no Heineke, he's with Arizona. So, all right, and then lastly, and again, Lloyd Vance joining us on a Friday edition of BYP with Q. Rich Quinones here, hashtag BYP. Check out the YouTube channel. Lloyd will be with us throughout the NFL season, as he typically has been for the last, oh my goodness, 15 plus years. We got some other segments that we're working on too. You'll be able to catch Lloyd on in addition to BYP. Dalvin Cook signs with the Jets. Pardon me. I mean, listen, I'm not going to say it's, I'm getting choked up thinking about this. The 2011 Dream Team, right? Because you got a GOAT quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. But man, you add him, you get Hall back, you've got some very good offensive talent. I think Dalvin Cook has a ton of tread left on the tire. I think he's just a wonderful back. I mean, he runs hard. He can catch the ball at backfield. He makes guys miss. He runs harder when it comes to the fourth quarter. He's a reliable guy. We saw what he was able to do over the last several years in Minnesota. I mean, it's almost like the Jets are getting like this just greedy with all these riches, right? They're getting all greedy with all these gifts under the Christmas tree. I mean, their
They're
defense is going
trying
to
to
be good.
reproduce. Yeah, trying to reproduce
Yeah.
that Rams team from a couple of years ago. It was almost like an all-star team. They're bringing all these guys together
Yep.
for that big run and see if they can get it done. Now, the love fest is going on around the National Football League. I don't know if I've watched the first two episodes of Hard Knocks with the Jets, and it's all about how Aaron Rodgers has come there and changed the culture of this organization, and he just brings so much to the table, the missing piece of the puzzle, and we have all the pieces around him, and this team's ready to make a deep run. So, we'll see if they're able to fulfill all these big expectations. I don't know what the line is, Q. Maybe you can look that up to see how many wins they're projecting for this team. I figure it's probably got to be 10 plus or so. And they struggled at points last year in terms of when they got out in these shootout games. Obviously, yeah, Zach Wilson was a kid that had some turnovers, but
Oh yeah.
Aaron Rodgers struggled too. I don't know if it was the thumb injury or what last year, but it's going to be an interesting team to watch. It's going to be a great watch.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into the Hard Knocks, to be honest.
Mm.
Now remember they had the Jets. I don't know if this pushes them over 10, but they had it 9.5, 10
Okay.
at last check. So, I mean, if you think about this, right? Since if you go since August 9th, 2013 to August 9th, 2023, a couple weeks ago, you're talking about a 10-year span. The Jets have a combined record of 56 and 106. Just a horrible franchise. I mean, it's a losing franchise. There's no question about it. They had their moments with Testaverde and Sanchez and Namath and a little flurry here and there in the 80s with Todd and O'Brien. Okay, fine. Yeah, I mean, does Cook push them to 10.5, 11? I don't necessarily think so. I think this team, and I'll hold for it when we do our predictions, but I know now why they didn't want to be on Hard Knocks, because you've got their big brother, right? The Giants, who have just kind of quietly flown under the radar. And that's what you want. You want your team to fly under the radar. Cook, Rodgers, here you go. New York media, Hard Knocks. I get it. It's a distraction, right? You just don't want certain things to be put out there. Um, but I do believe it's going to take Aaron Rodgers a couple games to kind of get acclimated with this offense. Uh, I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to be horrible. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to light the world on fire. I think he's poised for a big year, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this team's going to win a lot of games. Like, you can put up good stats and numbers, but it doesn't necessarily equate to wins. I think they're going to be fascinating to watch, right? Because of the weapons they have on the offensive side, on the defensive side, the exposure they're getting on Hard Knocks, making the move for Cook. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is the biggest story in the NFL. People will just watch the Jets because they want to watch Aaron Rodgers. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win 12, 13 games and go to the AFC Championship. Look, if this team doesn't get to the playoffs, doesn't make a deep run, hell, I can even say get to the Super Bowl. It's a mitigated disaster, because they put all their eggs in the Aaron Rodgers basket, right? And it's just, like I said, I'll leave it at that until we do our predictions, but it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, for the same reason we want to watch the train wreck maybe in Washington, we want to see maybe a little, fender bender in New
Oh
York.
yeah, it's a great stories, and that's
Yeah.
that's what we've all come to love and write about and talk about the National Football League, and there are a couple things stand out for me in terms of this Jets team. Robert Salah is on the hot seat. He's got to get it done. He's been there a couple of years now. The team is greatly underachieved. Yes, he can point to a variety of reasons, but they've underachieved. And then that offensive line, it's in flux. Aaron Rodgers even talked about it the other day. It's still not coming together. And you have Mekhi Becton, who was their cornerstone left tackle, a guy who they paid a ton of money to, drafted him high. He's been injured, and he's not looked good in camp, quite frankly. So they're trying a variety of things. They got Dwayne Brown there. They got Billy Turner coming over from Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. He's there on that offensive line. So they got to fix that line and keep him upright, because let's face it, he's a 39-year-old quarterback. And you saw last year when he got banged up with that thumb, he just was not the same guy the rest of the season. So they got to do that. And then they got to also feed all these mouths on that team. You got
Yeah.
Wilson, you got Brees Hall, you got Cook. There's going to be a lot of guys crying for the football. Um, Interesting team, as you said, and I'm looking at their schedule. It starts, they host Buffalo, at Dallas, then it hosts New England, and then host KC. So that's their first four games. And we're really going to see how this team starts the season and get a good picture of who they're going to be.
This just came down a couple moments ago. Jordan Schultz reporting. Looks like Jadeveon Clowney is signing with the Ravens, 3-time Pro Bowl selection, 43 career sacks, a couple forced fumbles, a guy that's kind of bounced around. I mean, a guy that made his bones in college off of one friggin' highlight film and a hit. And it's safe to say he hasn't really lived up to the expectations. I mean, now you're just giving Baltimore a little depth. So, he's staying within division. Obviously, he was with Cleveland last year, but, that's another perfect example of, you get so enthralled and enamored with a highlight clip like that. But at the end of the day, you're seeing some of these guys bounce around. But you can never have too much depth. We talked about it, right? We started the show with it. We'll finish the show with it on the defensive side of the ball.
And he's the former number one pick, and you're still hoping he has a little bit left in the tank. Kind of what they're doing with Odell Beckham, bringing him in there, seeing if he can help this team. The only thing is with these veterans, if they're not starting or contributing, they're not going to help you in other ways like a young guy would. They're not going to. He's not running down on no punts. They're not helping you on kickoff or any of that or special teams. So these guys got to contribute on the front line, or there are going to be some
Yep.
notable cuts. We talk about the tough decisions that are coming up after these preseason games, and these guys got to come in there and provide some value, and then they'll work their way within the team. But if they're getting paid a lot of money and they're not contributing, a lot of these coaches are not going to wait on them.
Yeah, Lions just released Denzel Mims, right? Practice ankle injury. I mean, which led to a calf injury in rehab. Rappaport's reporting, but I mean, he was a bust with the Jets, but when healthy, maybe an intriguing addition. I wrote this down: 90 to 53. I mean, that's just like, Crazy Eddie slashing all the prices there and saying back in the day, boom, 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 right? Um, so I always love when guys get cut, right? And the fans will go on social and they'll be like, you got to pick this guy up. Well, the guy just got cut. There's reasons that he got cut. And 99.9% is they believe the player is shot and he can't do it anymore. Once in a while, you'll find that little rarity where a guy might contribute here and there. But I can tell you this, listen, teams like the Eagles, they live off of this. To them, they love discount days, right? So all of a sudden, they'll start plucking some of these guys and they'll figure out a way to make them work. Patriots years ago used to do that. So I just find that really fascinating. 90 to 53. I mean, you are just.
Yeah, and let's face it, most of these GMs already got the top, you know, 3/4 of their roster. They already know who those guys are going to be. It's that bottom third. It's those last couple spots. A guy that's going to help them a variety of ways. He can be the extra linebacker that helps out on the kickoff team. The extra receiver that's a gunner. Whatever they can do to help them make the team the better. Because these young guys, they're fighting for these spots, and most of these veterans, they have these contracts, and they're not even playing in preseason, so they know they're good.
Yep. 100%. All right, my friend. We will do it again next week. NFC East. We got some preseason tonight. Obviously, I remember years ago, I used to love when you would get some of these, the starters out there for a legit series or two. It's not like it. We understand that, but we're going to blink, season right around the corner. We'll go through the NFCs. We'll really go in depth. We'll kind of go through some surprises, maybe some dark horses teams. We'll look at the divisions. We'll do some player props. So we got a lot of stuff brewing for you guys out there, but always appreciate Lloyd jumping on a Friday edition of BYP. Enjoy the weekend, my friend.
All right, Q. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime.